And you're live.
Okay, welcome to House Education on Thursday, January 30th, 2025. We're going to spend the next half hour, 45 minutes, kind of getting a better understanding of how Vermont's education system worked at the state level before we changed from a commissioner to a secretary, and all of that from somebody who lived it. Why don't you just introduce yourself? And I guess sit back and tell us the story.
My name is Armando Villaseca, the last commissioner and first secretary of education in Vermont. And I'd be more than happy to tell you my position, and as well as some of our state board members at the time's position publicly on the idea of going from a commissioner to a secretary and changing the responsibilities. But just so you know, right now, I'm semi-retired. I was telling Emily I skied yesterday and today, because that's what we do. And I go to Cuba on a regular basis. Just got back Sunday and leaving Monday again with groups. Great political opportunity for people to go down and visit. Anyway, that's enough of that. So sometime around 2011, Governor Shumlin started a discussion, at least internally, about transferring the Department of Education and making it an agency. Again, that was a discussion that I was hired by the board with Governor Douglas, and he never mentioned that. That was never one of his positions, at least that he shared with us or the board or publicly. But Governor Shumlin felt that as one of the largest departments in the state, agencies, the commissioner's office, that maybe he would like a little bit more control over the function of the department. Honestly, I think it was all about being able to name, this is my own position, name the secretary, because I was the only cabinet member who didn't answer to the governor, which allowed for a level of flexibility and freedom that I do not believe I had after I became the secretary. I know that the State Board of Education felt the same way. And I know that at the time, Fanny Smiller, who was the chair, and then Stephen Morse, Bill Mathis, who never kept his thoughts to himself, all were very vocal, Anne Marie and all kinds of people, very vocal about in opposition to this for two reasons. Two or three reasons, but the main one was to keep it as apolitical as possible. It was always political. There's no way around it. But there was that flexibility that the state board had as an independent body that had a good geographic representation of the state, because folks were from different parts of the state, as well as different levels of interest and experience in education. So that, to them, felt was one of the number one reasons. The second one was also the connection with local boards, as well as the local teachers associations and schools. As a school board, and I know some of you have probably served on school boards, and I think Emily's told me she's still on the board, there's a connection between the state board and local boards, basically all working in the same direction and facing some of the challenges. So that was the second piece. Third one was the rulemaking process, to be able to continue to have an opportunity to make rules that were guided more by educational quality and right things, the right ideas, versus good ideas that may have a little bit of a political component. So I think those were the three main components of the board's position, and there are some others as well, but those were, I think, some of their main positives. That it was a more effective board, cumbersome, as all boards are. Nothing happens quickly, but at least they felt like they had a connection to the schools that, and an interest in listening to what's happening in the field versus looking at things with a more political point of view, whether it's Democrat or Republican, it doesn't really matter. So I think those were the main ones. And the other issue was, and it hasn't happened yet with Rebecca, and after that, is the potential changeover every 2 years. That was one of the, for continuity's sake, And, you know, when I was there, Richard Kate prior to me was there, I think 4 or 5 years. I was there for 5+. Rebecca was there for a while. So there was a continuity in the commissioner's position that could have been impacted by becoming, a cabinet position as secretary. So I think those were the main ones. And again, from Governor Shumlin's position is control of the secretary. It's huge. To have the ability to choose that person and then have them follow your political or your ideas. Not to say that Peter Shumlin and I didn't have very similar educational, views on education. There were some issues about homeschooling that he and I disagreed vehemently. There were some questions about also with the health department about vaccination in schools. There were some, challenges he and I had around the whole restructuring of the state boards and our office's position and some of his positions, which again, weren't that far apart, but far enough to make it seem like he wanted more control. So those were, I think, the main reasons that he wanted it, and also the funding. He thought that he would have more of an opportunity to manage the funding of schools because they, as you know, I need to tell you about that. That was a challenge and has been for years. He thought that he might have a better chance of moving along with legislative support, the restructuring of the schools in the state, similar to what you're dealing with right now, which I'll give you my opinion on that sometime if you ask for it. But so I think that he felt all those things, and I think positively. You know, I don't think that there was anything negative about this, other than whenever you reach that level of authority, of, you know, governor, and, you know, you want to be able to manage the people around you. So again, that's natural human instinct. I was very vocal about it. I mean, after it happened, I supported it. Wait, what are you going to do? But our state board, if you look back, there was some in Caledonia Record, in 7 Days, and some other places where the state board put out their positions why it shouldn't, why it wasn't a good idea at that time. But Joey Donovan, I think, was in your position at the time, and the committee felt that if the governor wanted it, and the governor felt like he would take responsibility and be held accountable for the Agency of Education, then they would give it a try. And eventually it did. Honestly, I haven't seen a whole lot of accountability in any of this. I think the state board was very much accountable because they're going home to communities and people are talking to them. When you're the governor or the secretary of education, it's a little different. Having that ability to communicate ideas, opinions, your thoughts about what the state board was doing. So I think that was one, those were sort of just in general, some of the, now I will also say that I don't believe he handled it very well, the actual transition. Just a little note, when he named me as the Secretary of Education, he also announced the national search for a new one. I hadn't announced that I was leaving yet. I had announced it privately with him and said, look, Peter, I don't want to look like I'm resigning when you name me. Name me, and then 3 months, 4 or 5 months later, I'll say, look, things have come up, I'll leave. When that happened, that basically took the state board and the rug right out from under us. So for the next, though Rebecca was hired probably 3 to 6 months later, it was, you know, I continued to do what I had to do, but when I came to the school, it was a little different than it was prior to that. And I did visit schools quite a bit. I was in schools on a regular basis to really see what was going on and to get a better handle on the whole issue of the school merger consolidation discussion at the time.
Could you talk a little bit about the state board? Was it just makeup? I don't mean personalities, but how people were put on the state board. Has that changed, or was it always the governor's?
The governor always appointed, so there was always a rotating board members. So any governor could then appoint folks who would still have an influence, the governor's influence on the board. They were appointed by the board. At this point, the board was probably half and half because Governor Douglas, you know, I came in right prior to Governor Douglas leaving office and Governor Shumlin taking office. So there was a nice balance there of people. And again, that was a good working group. And if you went to any state board of education meeting, there were dozens of people there, from state board members, principals, superintendent association, different groups. It really felt like a working board as opposed to a more formal board. And maybe there is today. I haven't been to a board. I have watched a couple on TV, and they have a little bit of a different feel. And once I became the secretary, basically, I gave them a lot less time because the governor had directed me to do certain things and to sort of start getting them used to not depending on you and the office of the Department of Education as they had in the past, that the world was changing. So that didn't sit well with me, by the way. They didn't like having, because they were used to having a certain level of support, and that support dropped dramatically on purpose. You know, to be honest with you, I think if it's moving to the governor's office, there's less. And at the time, my feeling was, if you're gonna have the governors, get rid of the state board. There's no more reason to have a state board of education. Until I started thinking about the rulemaking process. And that made me think that maybe a state board having that rulemaking process authority balanced out some of the political opportunities or options that could occur.
I think what for me, one of the biggest challenges, and it's really probably for any secretary, you know, because we have a 2-year governorship, to me, it must hurt the ability to attract candidates whose job expectancy could be 2 years. And so
I agree with
it
you.
doesn't matter who the governor is, what party.
It doesn't
or
matter. I agree. And again, you know, when they do a national search, it's great to do a national search, but there are a lot of strong people in Vermont. But is a former superintendent going to leave let's say they have a nice position for something that may occur only last 2 years?
Representative Cam.
I was wondering, how long did the transition take to switch over? Did you just change the letterhead and all of a sudden you are secretary? Or, and really what I'm wondering is, does there needs to be some task force committee to help manage that process?
Well, I think that it wasn't as well planned, I think, as probably should have been on both sides. And I'm not blaming the governor's office. You know, our office probably has as much responsibility to it. There were several people in our office, and if you get a chance, Bill Talbot, Bill Talbot is probably, and Carol King. Carol was the historian of the Department of Education, who had been there for ages. And those two people can run circles around, just so you know. But the process, yes, changing letterhead was one of those things, but also everybody having to reorganize their thinking, that now the directions were coming from a different place, and it wasn't as public, if you will, because the state board always discussed things sometimes ad nauseum, you know? But that's the job. I mean, you know, they can say about the same thing about all of us. So that process at least was out in the open. People were prepared for it. Different constituents had a chance to provide input into the process, where that doesn't happen today. And it doesn't happen not just in Vermont, I'm sure in any situation. And there are comment periods for taking comments, but it's not the same as, you know, special ed coordinator from Southern Vermont coming in and saying, look, here's the reality of what's going on. Or tech director who's struggling with the tuition with the schools. So it was a different feel. So I actually think it was much more, may have been slower, but more effective.
Just this thought is occurring to me as you're saying, under the old model, sort of the touch with the districts and with those examples you just came up with. So now I'm selfishly thinking, did that also take some of the burden off the legislature as an agency is a little more cloistered from that potentially, and so therefore a lot of those problems come to us. The state board's role is different. I mean, I'm just looking at it.
I agree. I think that's exactly what happened. I think all of a sudden, the Ed Committee and others started having to deal with issues that state boards would be dealing with that may have been at a much lower level of importance. You should be dealing up here with, you know, funding and all the other things. So that I think it could be, or it has been distracting for you. Decisions that would have been made by the state board are now falling on your table.
Representative Long.
So thank you for coming. This is really helpful and bringing back a ton of memories. Having worked,
Good, man.
all good memories, always. Having worked through quite a number, as a school board member, through quite a number of transitions in this state, including I became a school board member before Act 60. So, remind me, I'm pretty sure it was under your tenure, but remind me, wasn't the state board traveling around the state to hold their meetings in each
Yes,
region
That's
over the
exactly what
state?
we did. Yes.
Which really, in my mind, I had forgotten about it till you started talking.
Townsend.
I just remember us having very close access as community members to the work that was going on, the feedback. It felt like there was a pretty close connection there in ways that doesn't feel like it exists today. Not to say that we don't have access, but it's just different. So I wanted to confirm that. And the other question, Representative Conlon asked the question about the appointments to the state board. The process of nominating candidates, somebody needs to remind me even what happens today and what happened back then, because the governor did appoint to the state board, I believe, but I'm not sure I can't remember how those candidates came about. I thought the state board interviewed potential candidates and then gave the names to the governor,
Not
but I
sure about
can't
that.
remember.
I know they were nominated to the governor. I always thought the governor interviewed them. I'm not quite sure.
The finalists.
The finalists, yes.
Yes, but where did those finalists come from? And that's
You're talking about for the
state board.
For the state board.
Prior to the current model.
There was some interviewing by the board, and then I think they would send the finalists to the governor to interview, or at least two. He might not interview, he might know them.
So as a follow-up, that today, I believe the state board acts in that role to name the secretary. They screen candidates, am I right?
That's They forward 3 names.
And
to
they
the governor.
forward 3 names, but I think that was how it went with the state board, and I don't believe that happens today with the state board. I believe the governor has control for the nominees, but I'm not sure. I mean, I can't remember. Somebody needs to help me with this.
And I know for the commissioner's position, the state board would recommend one person to the governor.
Yes,
And then the governor would say yes or no.
got it. Thank you.
And that was also
That's-
recent, and I think maybe prior to that, there was less involvement by the governor's office, maybe a decade earlier than this.
Okay, okay.
But I think that changed maybe on the governor levels.
Yeah, it would be great to get clarity around all of
One of the things we hear a lot, and the thing we're wrestling with, is the capacity at the AOE, or what it is now, to support the field, to implement work, like how, are they the kind of conduit of information and implementation support to the field, or is it more, I've heard some describe it as sort of just a federal compliance agency recently? We know there's a lot of vacancies. And I'm trying to get a handle around how much of that is a function of, we hear about there was huge cuts in 2008, I think, to the, I guess then department. How much of it is a function of the fiscal reality then versus the sort of governance change and some of the political issues at play, and what you've seen, even as being in the field, probably, when it was a more robust.
Actually, I came in right when I came in, we had to lay off like 40 some odd people.
Yeah.
Almost immediately. I let Bill Talbot do that because he was the acting commissioner. I didn't want the commissioner doesn't want to come in and do that. But what that did was it really put a strain on us, and it still provided a lot of support. There was still a lot of support for the field, but also the compliance component started taking on a larger role. There were the must-dos. You want that federal money coming in, you better have these compliances and set at the expense of maybe some support for the fields who needed. I mean, particular time, there was all the reading discussion, reading, teaching reading, the whole tech ed process. Early ed was also, so all these things where we needed to possibly provide more support had to be scaled back because of the reductions and as well as because of the compliance piece. No Child Left Behind came in, a ton of money came in on top of that with all these strings attached. And even though we publicly disagreed with it, it was only so far, and you're gonna go disagreeing with this when there's all kinds of money. You know, again, we didn't like the assessment, that everything was based on testing, which I believe is one of the reasons why, you know, you might be struggling, instead of teaching common sense, history, you know, some of the things that I grew up with, we spent time making sure kids pass the assessment, another conversation. But then, again, back to with all that money came a responsibility to oversee that money and the auditing, of those funds, which are happening regularly, took up a lot of our time. We still, I think the agency or department, and even when it became an agency, tried to continue that, history of providing as much support as possible. I can't say, I think once Rebecca came in, it was, you know, the governor at that point had a little bit more, sense of feeling comfortable with the whole process, so maybe that had changed. But again, the agency or the department should be to help support the field. In conjunction with universities, in conjunction with other professional development groups, the department was a conduit for all that and being able to focus that on the places that needed support.
Yeah, and it's interesting just to note that, you know, not only do we go through the economic recession, that cost a lot of people, but at the same time, the federal compliance regulations just became more and more forgotten all about. No Child Left Behind, as it must have been an enormous task. I did want to ask, so we have every year that I've been here, the state board comes in and says, you know, we could use some money for an attorney and for support staff and all of that. And that's all a result of sort of separating the two.
Right.
And therefore, the people who worked at the agency who supported the board previously are now only working for the agency, and it's only by basically a favor.
Yes.
That they support the board. Was that gradual, or did that also happen?
Boom. And that actually was, I think, pulling that Band-Aid off fast. Because all of a sudden they went from having the ability to have 3 attorneys, not at their beck and call, but, you know, pretty much if they wanted something, to do research for them before they were doing something. They had folks in the agency, if they were discussing special education, they could request for those people to come or demand that they come. So there was some loss of support. And the money, honestly, I thought it was embarrassment, the amount of money that they provided that first year. I think the first year they should have provided a little bit more to help with the transition. Now, our office at the time continued to provide that support until then I left sometime in 2013. So I'm not quite sure how that continued after Rebecca and then Dan after that. I'm not sure how it works today.
Just to sort of piggyback on your questions there, I can't remember the exact year you came in, but, you mentioned how you had to lay off 40 people when you came in. I think that wasn't that the result of Governor Douglas's challenges for change?
Well,
Challenges for change, wow.
yeah, and it's interesting because when you talk about the independence between the two offices, I was naive. You know, I was coming from the field. I thought I knew it, you know. So this comes out, the governor's, so I write an op-ed in the Brunswick Free Press, when the Free Press was a bigger paper. I'm driving to work to get nominated to meet with the governor, and he says, "You're disagreeing with the governor before you even signed your paperwork?" You know, this was one of the people in his office. I said, "I'm sorry, but you know, I'm independent." And the governor and I had a good relationship. Even though he would say sometimes in the room, he'd say, "We can't talk, we have a Democrat in the room," you know? But he was wonderful, treated me with respect, listened to what I had to say. They didn't always agree with me, and could have really ended my commissioner's position that day. But he didn't. He said, "You know, we disagree. Now we'll have to come out with something that's gonna help balance that idea." But it bought me a lot of bennies in the field. You know, coming in with a public disagreement with the governor over funding, you know, gave me put us in a different position. Our secretary could have never, in their wildest dreams, have done that. And that was the nice thing, again, with Governor Shumlin prior to the transition, and with Governor Douglas, there was always that ability to agree to disagree. And they may push their as much pressure on other people, but there was always that difference. And I thought, honestly, I thought that Governor Douglas had we discussed education issues more than I did with, Governor Shumlin. Just could have been a lot of reasons, because I was new, whatever. But that independence, I think, is really important. Now, does that mean that I disagree with everything they go? Of course not. There were times that you had to go along because you just had to go along, as you all know. There were some times that maybe that wasn't the best decision that I felt, but it was a harmless enough decision that going along with it wasn't going to impact kids, which is ultimately what we're all about, is trying to improve opportunities for kids.
Okay, go ahead.
Well-
But do not ask him to.
The penny?
What's that?
I was gonna spend the penny and ask for. You, just given your institutional knowledge and having been at multiple layers of the state, and everything old is new again.
Mhm.
As we talk about and think about transformation, spending, but kids. What would be your sort of guiding, questions for us, or guiding concerns for us in thinking about potentially restructuring in some way, education in Vermont in this moment with an eye for kids?
Well, one of the challenges you have right now is you have what happened with the current secretary would have never happened under the previous model. So good or bad, it doesn't matter, because the state board would have already made the decision. One of those would have gone to the board, whatever, however it worked, which puts puts the secretary in a difficult position. They're an intern, who knows really what's going to happen. So that's one. When an intern comes out with an idea of reducing the number of districts to 5, has a different feel than if that person was a permanent member of the, again, whether that's a good idea or a bad idea, that has to be discussed. But I think that hurts the position. I do think as you look forward, my entire almost 6 years, and even prior to that, was really looking at how do we increase the efficiencies in our educational system in ways that improve opportunities for kids. And I would go around the state and meet with school boards. Sometimes, a couple of times they had to call the sheriffs to come in, because particularly in the southern part, Wyndham County could be, it was tough, even further south, Bennington County. But anyway, those were the type of discussions that were valuable to go out there before any decisions were made. That idea of mergers, consolidation, call it what you will, to me, had to occur. At the time we had 63 school districts, 46 superintendents for a state that has, less than 100,000 kids. It's ridiculous. So the idea was, how do you get the state and board members and others to start looking at a transition from what we have to what we could have? First, we had to agree on that, and that's where the challenges were. People were always afraid of schools being closed. And my number one point was, I don't want to close any schools, because, some you had to close. I'm not gonna use any examples. But what happens is that if you're gonna merge schools, and some of those kids have to be on the bus for too long, some rural schools, we live in a rural state, some places in Northeast Kingdom, some places in Windsor County, wherever, there's nothing you can do about it. In other cases, I think there were opportunities, but the real savings not savings, but also the beginnings of it is reducing the number of districts. We don't need 46 superintendents. We don't need 46 central offices. We don't need 46 business managers. We don't need 46 of everything. Now, if you could, whatever that number is, at the time we were looking at counties as one of the options among many, and that seemed to be the least threatening to folks. Because, right now, if you're in Essex, Caledonia County, and you're just a county district, then there's a similar feel, similar perspective, similar feel there, versus something else. So that was the direction we were moving in, and then we stopped. This hasn't been discussion, I don't know, you probably go back to your archives, probably going back 30 years. And still has no decisions been made. Is the enrollment of Vermont going to go up in the future? Maybe, global warming seems to be drawing some folks up to New England, or climate change, excuse me.
If we built some houses, maybe.
I agree with you, by the way. That's,
Yeah.
I mean, even educators, it's hard to find educators, it's hard to find others. But anyway, I think that once you can get past this, thing that you have on your back, really, this has been stuck in every committee for years, grappling with the same thing. Once you're able to put that behind you, whatever the decision is, then at least you can start focusing on more meaningful things instead of the same governance over and over and over. Political will, governor's office, are they open to looking at different ideas around this model? Are the legislators willing to go back and talk to their constituents and say, look, we need to do some things? So there's pressure and difficulties at all levels, and I'm not downplaying it. It would be easier if the governor could just say, this is the way it is. But that would be too big a risk, I think, for most people.
Yeah, I think as I'm sure you found out, it's not a political party thing. It is a
No.
geography, tradition, all of that. And it's really hard to say, okay, who gets to be the bad guy? Even though the ultimate result could be much greater opportunity for kids. To the adults, somebody's gonna be the bad guy.
It's always the adults. I love working in schools. I love kids, teachers and parents. Not really, of course, I mean, but it really is. School board members, that's another issue.
Questions?
And I would recommend, again, if you have a chance, Bill Talbot and Carol King would be much, I think, to give you a different perspective. And as I quote my former communications director, he's saying is, be careful what you wish for. This was prior to that. Came through and then you guys are looking at it again.
Alana, thank you very much for your
Thank
time.
you very much. Good luck.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah, bye-bye.
See you soon.
So,
All right, we'll go